Hello, this is part number 59, preparation for exam NSE4 Fortinet. Network address translation, configuration modes for network address translation. There are two ways to configure firewall policy SNAT, Source Network Address Translation. Use the outgoing interface address is the first type, and second, use dynamic IP pool. When you select use outgoing interface address on the matching firewall policy, FortiGate uses the egress interface address as the network address translation IP for performing SNAT. If there are multiple devices behind FortiGate, FortiGate performs many-to-one NAT, network address translation, and it is known as PAT, port address translation. FortiGate assigns to each connection sharing the egress interface address a port number from a pool of available ports. The assignment of a port enables FortiGate to identify packets associated with the connection and then perform the corresponding translation. This is the same behavior as the overloaded IP pool type, which you will also learn later. Optionally, we may select a fixed port, in which case the source port translation is disabled. With a fixed port, if two or more connections require the same source port for a single IP address, only one connection is established. For example, there is a personal computer behind the FortiGate that shares the same public IP address 70.70.70.70 to access the Internet web server, which IP address is 80.80.80.80. Because outgoing interface address is enabled on the firewall policy, set NAT enable on the command line interface command, the source IP address of the personal computer is translated to egress interface address. The source port, however, is not always translated. It depends on the available ports, and the connection is 5-tuple. In this example, FortiGate translates the source port of the connection from personal computer 2 only. Otherwise, the two connections would have the same information on the session table for the reply traffic, which would result in a session clash. IP pools are a mechanism that allows sessions leaving the FortiGate firewall to use network address translation. An IP pool defines a single IP address or a single IP address to be used as the source address for the duration of the session. These assigned addresses are used instead of the IP address assigned to that FortiGate interface. IP pools are usually configured in the same range as the interface IP addresses. When we configure the IP pools that will be used for network address translation, there is a limitation that we must take into the account. If the IP address in the pool are different from the IP addresses that are assigned to the interfaces, communications based on those IP addresses may fail if the routing is not properly configured. For example, if the IP address assigned to the interface is 172.16.100.1/24, we cannot choose 10.10.10.1 to 10.10.10.50 for the IP pool unless appropriate routing is configured. If we use an IP pool, the source address is translated to an address from that pool rather than egress interface address. The larger the number of addresses in the pool, the greater the number of connections that the pool can support. The default IP pool type is overload. In the overload IP pool type, many to one or many to a few relationship and port translation is used. For example, source IP address is 10.0.1.10 and it is translated to the address 70.70.70.71, which is one of the addresses defined in the pool of addresses. The pool of addresses is from 70.70.70 with last octet 71 to which is last octet is 75. In the one-to-one pool type, FortiGate assigns an IP pool address to an internal host on a first-come, first-served basis. There is a single mapping of an internal address to an external address, and that is an IP pool address is not shared with any other internal host, thus the name one-to-one. If there are no more addresses available in the IP pool, FortiGate drops packets from unserved hosts. For example, there are 3 hosts accessing the internet. Hosts PC1, which is 10.0.1.10, PC2, which IP address is 10.0.1 with last octet 45, and PC3, which last octet is 12. And there are 3 devices, all of them are connected to the FortiGate device and then going to the internet. But there are only 2 IP addresses which could be assigned. 70.70.70.71 and 70.70.72 respectively. And if PC1 and PC2 packets are received first by FortiGate and therefore served with address 70.70.71 and 70.70.72 respectively, then FortiGate drops packets sourced from PC3 because they arrived last, which is when there are no more available addresses in the IP pool to choose from. Thank you.